What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing another weapon breakdown for Battlefield 2042, this time covering the DM7. In these weapon breakdowns we're going to be going through a bunch of stats that you guys need to know, such as the rounds per minute, reload times, bullet velocity, damage over distance, bullets to kill over distance, and time to kill over distance as well. On top of those stats we'll then go over the recoil pattern for the weapon, and then lastly I'll go over 3 unique loadouts that I've crafted for specific playstyles, for those of you who aren't 100% sure on which attachments to use. Before we get into it, if you guys do end up enjoying this video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new to the channel then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications, as there's going to be plenty more content like this on the way in 2022. With that being said though, guys, let's get stuck right into my weapon breakdown for the DM7. So the DM7 is obviously classed as a marksman rifle, and this one is one of the weapons that you have unlocked when you first fire up the game. It has a magazine size of 15 plus 1 in the chamber, and it fires at a rate of 299 rounds per minute, which is right in the middle for the marksman rifles in 2042. Now for its reload times, it takes 2.85 seconds for a tactical reload, which is when you manually reload it, or it has an empty reload time of 2.43 seconds, which is when it automatically reloads after running out of bullets. Now just like the M5A3, that seems to be a bug. Most weapons reload faster when you manually reload it compared to the empty reload, but for some reason with the DM7, M5A3 and the BF2042, it is actually faster for an empty reload. So yeah, I assume that's just a bug, but I'm not actually 100% sure. As for the velocity, it sends its ammunition down range at 680 meters per second, which is again right in the middle for the marksman rifles, with the SVK having a faster velocity while the VCAR has a slower velocity. Now getting into the more detailed stats for the DM7, keep in mind that these values are all based off of body shots, and when it comes to the marksman rifles, at least with the DM7 and the VCAR, headshots have a 1.9 times multiplier, so any value that you see in these graphs are just almost doubled when you land them to the head rather than the torso or the limbs. The marksman rifles have some very weird headshot multipliers. I'm not too sure exactly why they're not the same as most of the other weapons that have a 2 times multiplier, considering 1.9 is essentially the exact same thing, but then the SVK has a 1.5 times multiplier, so I assume this is just done for balancing reasons, just to tone down the headshot damage by a tiny bit. Now anyway, the DM7 deals 35 damage per bullet up to 74 meters, and then at 75 meters and beyond it drops down to 26 damage per shot, so it has got some really solid range and damage on it overall. As for the bullets that it takes to kill over distance, it takes 3 shots to kill up to 74 meters, and then at 75 meters and beyond, it'll take 4 shots to the body to kill an enemy. Lastly, moving on to the time to kill over distance, it kills in 401 milliseconds up to 74 meters, and then from 75 meters and beyond, it will take 602 milliseconds to kill. Obviously, these stats do vary quite a bit once you actually account for the headshots and missed shots like I mentioned, but assuming you hit every shot to the body at these ranges, then these stats are accurate according to that situation. Now moving on, we have the recoil pattern for the DM7, and as you can see, it doesn't have too much vertical recoil at all, simply due to the fact that it does have a slower rate of fire, but I will say that it does have some very randomized horizontal recoil. You can see from each of these patterns that they've all got about the same height as each other, yet horizontally they are quite different, so that is worth keeping in mind. This is just the factory DM7 that I'm showing here. I do have some videos on the channel covering some different attachment types and how they affect recoil and the overall weapon behavior though, so be sure to check those ones out as well. Now moving on, like I mentioned, I've actually crafted 3 different loadouts that I often like to use on the DM7 depending on the mode or the map or just how I feel like playing in general, so if you're not 100% sure on what attachments to use, then hopefully this can give you guys a good starting point, and obviously these can be slightly altered and adjusted to your own preferences, so these are by no means set in stone. Also keep in mind that you can obviously bring 3 attachments per slot in the plus system, and in these loadouts I'm only showing 1 attachment per slot, so technically you can bring all 3 of these loadouts along and change them on the fly. So the first loadout that I wanted to cover is the close quarters build, and this one obviously just makes the DM7 a little bit more viable at close range rather than mostly being dominant at longer ranges. For the sight, I use the 8R Hollow, as I like that it is still zoomed in enough to be usable at mid to long range, but it's also not too zoomed in for those close quarter situations. For the ammo, I use the close combat rounds, which slightly reduce the effectiveness at range while increasing the rate of fire, lowering the recoil, and reducing the reload speed, which obviously are all suited to those close quarter situations. For the underbarrel, I use the Rattlesnake Light Grip, and as always, this is generally just the best choice after testing it in my underbarrel attachments video, so like I said before, be sure to check that one out if you haven't already. Lastly, for the barrel, I use the Tactical Compensator, which just reduces the horizontal recoil ever so slightly, and as you saw from the recoil patterns earlier, that does come in handy with the DM7. Now moving on to the second loadout I wanted to cover, this one is the long range build, and exactly as it sounds, this one just makes the DM7 even better at long range than it already actually is. For the sight, I use the Raven 4x scope. This one is a personal favourite of mine as it has a nice clear sight while also not being too zoomed in, and this one also doesn't give off any sniper glare. For the ammo, I use the high power rounds as they increase the bullet velocity of the weapon and slightly increase the damage at range, at the cost of a little bit more recoil, a slower rate of fire, and a slightly slower reload speed. For the underbarrel, I use the LWG grip, which is generally just the best underbarrel attachment when it comes to those sort of longer range gunfights, which do tend to be a little bit more stationary. And then lastly, for the barrel, I use the extended barrel as this just increases the velocity of the weapon yet again, at the cost of a slightly slower rate of fire. Like I said, this build is definitely going to make the weapon a little bit more effective at range. It's obviously already really solid, but this build can legitimately turn it into pretty much a semi-auto sniper, so definitely give this one a try. Now lastly, for the third loadout, this one is called the all-rounder build, and this is essentially the loadout that I use about 80% of the time when I'm running the DM7. In my opinion, this is probably the meta loadout for the weapon overall. It doesn't really excel in any single area, but it just makes the DM7 feel pretty useful in essentially every single situation. So yeah, for me, this one is my go-to. For the sight, I use the TV 2x scope. This one is just a nice clear sight, and it's easily my own personal favorite for pretty much any weapon when it comes to just adding a little bit of extra range than the red dot sights. For the ammo, I use the standard issue mag. For me, I just find that these are the all-round best compared to the others. Every other magazine type kind of comes with a negative, whereas these are just really solid in terms of damage, rate of fire, and range. For the underbarrel, I use the rattlesnake light grip again, and then lastly for the barrel, I use the tactical compensator, as once again this helps with that horizontal recoil since it does have quite a bit of random recoil as we saw earlier. Like I said, this one is my personal favourite build for the DM7, and it's the one that I'm pretty much running around with more often than not, so hopefully you guys do enjoy this one as much as I do. So that is pretty much it for the DM7, guys. I do really enjoy using this weapon, although to be honest it is bordering on overpowered, so I try not to use it too much. I don't really like using the weapons that are, completely dominant, and this is definitely one of those weapons, but in saying that, it is still good fun to use. So if you enjoy fighting at those sort of mid to long ranges, then this one is definitely worth trying out. Up next, I'm hoping to cover the MCS 880 for the shotgun class, which will conclude all of those sort of like early unlock weapons. But other than that, let me know which weapons you guys want me to cover next, as I'm largely going to base them off what you guys want to see the most. So be sure to leave some recommendations down in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you guys are new to the channel, then definitely consider subscribing and turning on those notifications. If you want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.